William Lawrence, a professor of political science and international affairs at the American University in Washington, D.C. Professor, always good to speak to you. It seems from that report we just heard from Andy that Biden is putting more pressure on Netanyahu, not happy he hasn't agreed a deal. But it was not that long ago that we heard from the U.S. Secretary of State saying Netanyahu had accepted the agreement and it was up to Hamas to come to the table. Are we getting mixed messages from the U.S. administration?
Absolutely. So this is an agreement, the framework of which Israel has apparently agreed to twice, although they never say it publicly when it happens. They just say after the fact, oh, we agreed to that before. Some of the officials will say that, but they, in the moment, Netanyahu will never say we agree. And Hamas has agreed to it twice. But it's important to distinguish between what they call the framework and the technical details. So a couple of times, the framework has seemed to have been agreed to, and then they say, we're going to Doha or we're going to Cairo, and we're going to work on the details, and then things fall apart at the part of the detail level. Another mixed message we've been getting from the Americans is they keep saying, we're very, very close to a deal. And technically, they're right. We're very close to a deal. But there are some deal breakers, both for Netanyahu and for Hamas, that we keep running up against. So you could be 99% of the way there, but if you're not negotiating the problem, which is not happening here. There's no negotiation between Israel and Hamas. If you're not negotiating to get past the problems, the biggest one being control of the Philadelphia corridor, you don't have a deal.
You know, there's this talk about in the next few days, the U.S. will present a take it or leave it deal to both Israel and Hamas. At this point, is there a take it or leave it deal? Because what can the U.S. do here if both sides say, no, we're not going to agree to this particular deal? Things will continue as usual in Gaza, and we're going into almost a year now of this war.
Yeah. Take it or leave it. If leave it's an option means never have peace, which nobody thinks will happen and never will happen. So there's no such thing as a purely take it or leave it deal. All that means is take this deal or we're going to step back and let the fighting continue. And the U.S. keeps assuming that the fighting itself will create a certain momentum on both sides to convince them to take the deals, but it's not doing that. And put it sort of crassly, you know, Netanyahu seems to not want a deal because his government could collapse, his political career could be over, and he could be facing the Israeli justice system. So he's got a personal interest not to have a deal. And the Palestinians, in various ways, are saying, we want resistance forever. We want a ceasefire, even a permanent ceasefire, but we want our resistance to continue, which is also a state of quasi-total war. And both sides sort of wordsmith around the objections to their objections. But in the end, you know, if you want to keep fighting, you're going to keep fighting. So leave it means they keep fighting, which, again, nobody wants. So what the U.S. is going to have to do here is do what it's been unwilling to do all along, which is actually foster a negotiation between the two sides, Israel and Hamas. And the U.S., Egypt, and Qatar keep getting to the point where they're sort of almost doing that, but it's not really a negotiation. And the latest round, Hamas was just observers. They weren't even part of the negotiation.
Is the U.S. the best broker for a negotiation that will actually last, that will lead to an agreement that will last? Because as you've been saying, there haven't been these direct negotiations with Hamas. The Egyptians, the Qataris are also, of course, heavily involved, but there's a lot of mistrust from both sides here. And Israel, Netanyahu's government obviously feeling the pressure from the thousands of people who have been protesting, calling for a deal, calling for the hostages to come home. And then Palestinians themselves, who are the ones who are actually living through this war, and difficult to imagine that they are able to sustain the life and the living conditions that they're having to endure for a few more months of this. So there would be pressure on Hamas possibly from that side as well.
Well, all of the context you give is spot on. And of course, the U.S. is not the best broker, but never was the broker. All along, the U.S. kind of had, I mean, imagine if Norway was the broker. Yeah, they could have made some progress here and there, but the Israelis aren't going to really bend to what Norway says. And Hamas isn't really going to bend to what Norway says either. So this formula of three was the best available because the Israelis only listen to the Americans and only some of the time. And Hamas works directly with the Egyptians and the Qataris more than anyone else and does listen to them, which is why twice they agreed to versions of this proposal, just as Israel twice agreed with American prodding. So this is the best formula of the nations available because of the intractability of this 7-year conflict and the fact that there is so many dialogues of the deaf here. This is not an unsolvable problem, though. I mean, how do you monitor a border? It could be the Israelis, but it could be international peacekeepers. It could be a consortium of states. And it's all about protecting arms smuggling, which is mostly through tunnels. And the Egyptians proved in the mid-2010s they were pretty good at shutting down the tunnels, even though Netanyahu these days tries to score points by saying the Egyptians can't do that. So there's a deal to be had here about monitoring the flows of weapons underground, and a deal to be had about who controls that international border. But without more political will and a little bit more nudging and even arm twisting from the mediators towards the parties, this will continue for some time.
William Lawrence, always great to get your thoughts live to us there from the U.S. Capitol. Thank you.